Welcome to another episode of the Remade Life podcast. In this episode, I'm discussing how emotions become physical symptoms. More specifically, how they play an often unexpected but major role in autoimmune disease. So I'll share how you can start to acknowledge and release those long-held emotions so you can start to heal your body. I'm Coach Danny. Let's talk about it. Are you ready to rewrite your story and embrace a new perspective on healing autoimmune disease? Hey, I'm Daniela Spear, and I'm fascinated by exploring the human body, movement, and how emotions help to create our life's journey. After a transforming experience helped me to heal over 15 years of autoimmune symptoms, I decided to share what it looks like to have a second chance at a more compassionate relationship with my body. In this podcast, I will guide you in building lasting wellness by tapping into your body's innate wisdom, understanding the emotional roots of autoimmune disease, and how to use strength training not just for working out, but as a tool to heal from within. So get ready to revive your most inner joys, rebuild your health, and reclaim your life. This is the Remade Life podcast. Hello, we are officially at episode 10. Woohoo! Also, the day that this podcast releases, I will be celebrating 5 months of being medication free. So, lots of wins all around, lots of things to report on in the journey of being medication free, but I'm going to wait until the 6-month mark to give a more official update, so stay tuned for that. Today, we're talking about how emotions become physical symptoms. In general, those are going to be your chronic symptoms, and we'll talk about why. We'll talk about why that happens. But I just love how this lined up. I feel like reaching 10 episodes is a huge milestone in the podcasting world. So I feel like it's almost like a celebratory episode. And the fact that I get to talk about emotions this week feels so aligned and like a celebration, because the conversation on emotions and this journey of exploring and getting comfortable, acknowledging and being with my emotions has been a huge part of my healing journey. So I love that it feels like extra special being episode 10. So I am personally on a mission to shine some light on what has been societally suppressed for far too long, and that is emotions, and specifically emotions and disease in the body. So in our Western approach to medicine, we like to look at things from a single cause perspective, meaning we search for the one thing that caused the disease, and that usually results in a lot of medical testing and just a lot of doctor's visits, a lot of blood work, lab work, just a lot of the uncomfortable part of medicine. In trying to identify that one cause, but it also results in ignoring all of the other factors that played a role in creating a disease. Whereas a multi-cause approach, that looks at the whole person and their environment, both internal and external, to identify the cause of disease in the body. And this is important because it takes into account all of the experiences that help to shape a person's thought patterns, their behaviors, and the circumstances in which they live. So when you take a look at the whole, you recognize that disease does not always have a single cause, but rather it's a multifactorial cause. Multiple things contributing to creating disease. You'll often hear me say, it's never just one thing. It's multiple things. And I think that creates a more understanding approach to healing rather than this endless search for the one thing that caused disease. In fact, I have come to understand over the last couple of years that the searching is actually a part of the dis-ease. Like, it only creates more dis-ease. The searching and searching and searching outside of yourself only leads to an endless road of more searching. Just something to think about. Okay, so how do emotions become physical symptoms? When you experience an emotion, it is either validated and released, or it is rejected either by yourself or someone else, and it gets stored in the body. So when emotions are rejected, it's almost like they freeze in time, and then it gets stored in the body. So then in the future, when you experience a similar situation that brings up that same emotion, your response to that situation will be the same as when you first experienced it, but you won't necessarily know why or understand why you have that response, because you may not even be aware of that stored emotion in the body. And so what this looks like is when you have a child that experiences an emotion and then that emotion gets rejected, like, it's almost like that response gets frozen in their body. So then as an adult, when they experience a similar situation that brings up the anger or whatever, like, their response will inevitably be almost childlike, because that emotion wasn't addressed well in the early developmental years. And so as an adult, then you have these responses that maybe you don't understand why, because they've actually just been frozen in your body for a long time. So these situations that create stored emotions, like I said, often happen as children. And, as I'm saying this, like, I want to remind you, keep in mind that I am not a mental health professional. What I am sharing is from my own understanding and my own experiences, in hopes of helping you to also better understand your emotions. And if at any point during this episode or any of my podcast episodes, like, something comes up for you and you feel the need to speak to a mental health professional, I highly encourage you to do so, okay? I am not a mental health professional. I am just sharing what I have learned from my studies and my own experiences. So my goal is simply just to help you. So these situations, as I said, most often happen when we are children. And at that point in life, we do not yet have the skill set to address our own emotions. And so we usually seek that validation and comfort from either a parent or a caregiver or whatever adult figure is in your life at the time. But when that adult does not have the emotional capacity to validate or understand your emotional reaction, because remember, their emotions were likely also rejected at one point in their childhood too. And so they will reject your emotion by telling you to, stop crying, be quiet, go to your room, or they tell you that you're being too sensitive, you're overly emotional, and that your response was like unnecessary, not allowed. Like, good girls don't get angry, big boys don't cry. Like, oh, stop being such a crybaby, right? Like, we have all heard those things. And so you learn that emotions are bad and that you must silence them. Otherwise, you risk losing that love from a parent or caregiver. Like, would you really lose that love? Like, no, maybe not in most cases, but like, as a kid, this is how you assess and interpret the situation, because you do not have the capacity to consider other people's emotions. All you know is what you experience, right? So if you express big emotions, you think that love will be taken away. And so you learn to suppress those emotions and you stuff them away. And then eventually those suppressed emotions move into the unconscious mind and become repressed. But nonetheless, they are still there. We just don't recognize that those emotions are there. And so what happens when emotions get repressed in the subconscious mind, in the subconscious, unconscious mind? They begin to create inflammation and tension. There's a stored energy, and that energy needs to move. Like the word emotion literally has the word motion in it. Like emotions are energy in motion. Energy in motion. And we know this because we can feel how emotions change our physiology almost instantaneously, right? We sweat when we're nervous, or like our heart races when we're scared, or we feel our body temperature rise like when we feel angry. And we also can like feel a sense of calm when we feel safe and happy. So emotions have the power to change the state of our body in any given moment. And I think that is so cool. So when that energy is not allowed to move through the body, it gets stored. So the book, The Divided Mind by John E. Sarno, is a great resource. It's a pretty dense book, I'll be honest, but it does a very good job of detailing how emotions trigger an inflammatory response from the brain, and the brain will direct that anywhere else in the body that is seemingly convenient. So this is that psychosomatic connection, where that emotion from the brain, it's the brain's response, like gets stored in the body, right? Or I should say the psychosomatic connection is just the fact that the mind and body are connected, and what the mind experiences, the body experiences, and what the body experiences, the mind experiences. So like vice versa. And in the book, The Divided Mind, it does a really good job of detailing how like the emotion like moves from the brain into the body and gets stored. So, for example, let's say you are a tennis player, and the brain will decide, you know what, the elbow seems like a good place to store this energy, because now the person is going to focus on having an overuse injury and will think it's because of tennis, right? And so now you have this like physical injury to distract you from the long held emotional wounds. And your brain's job is always protection. And its goal is to always protect you. And it will create a physical symptom to protect you from the emotional pain, because the physical symptom is much easier to deal with than the emotional pain. And so then if you spend your time treating this physical symptom, like whatever it is, like tennis elbow, without addressing the emotional root cause, like the brain will find somewhere else to direct that emotional pain. And so like, let's say it shows up in your elbow and you go to physical therapy and you start feeling better, but you haven't taken care of the emotional pain behind it. Your brain will direct that emotional pain elsewhere in your body. So what happens is then you start to just spend your life chasing pain after pain after pain. And like, this reminds me of Dr. Perry Nicholson's account, Stop Chasing Pain, because that is literally what starts to happen. You start to chase pain from one area of your body to another, and then that cycle continues until you deal with the emotional root cause. And I will say, like, not every physical injury or pain is a result of an emotional wound. Like, obviously, if you trip and twist your ankle and that's like more of an acute, like immediate injury, like, yes, like go to physical therapy. Don't spend your time trying to find the emotional root cause of why you twisted your ankle. Or I don't know, maybe I do believe that we like attract the things that we need in our lives, but like I'm talking about the pains that just sort of kind of come up without explanation, or you don't really have like an incident to pinpoint and saying like, oh yes, like this hurts because like I fell and hurt, I hurt this body part. The chronic symptoms with underlying emotional root causes are generally like the ones that kind of sort of start to sneak in, and then like before you know it, you're like dealing with this pain, and like they're the ones that feel like nothing really helps. Like you've got a physical therapy, you've tried all these different treatments, and like nothing really seems to like really help it feel better, those are the ones that generally have like an emotional underlying component. And more specifically, like what we're talking about today is like the autoimmune symptoms that just seem very mysterious, right? Like we always talk about like autoimmune disease is like such a mystery. Like we don't know why this happens. Like there are a lot of factors that contribute to autoimmune disease, but we don't know what specifically like triggers that. Emotions. But I rest my case. So let's detail that emotion chronic pain cycle a little bit more. So when you get an emotion, or when an emotion gets stored in the body, it signals to the nervous system that there is danger present. So that energy has lost its momentum, and now there's like this alarm in the body. With that alarm, like the nervous system moves into a fight or flight response, right? So the sympathetic fight or flight, like there's danger present. And it stays there until the emotion is resolved, because like now this emotion that isn't allowed to move through the body is now like the danger signal. And so the nervous system moves into sympathetic fight or flight, and it stays there, which in many cases can be years, decades, or even a whole lifetime. So this is why nervous system regulation, it doesn't always work when you're trying to regulate your nervous system without addressing what's holding the on switch. So you have to address the emotion that is keeping the nervous system on in the first place. So you can know that your nervous system is dysregulated if you ever like say any of the following, like, there's no point to this, or like, this is all too much, or I feel stuck, I'm anxious and I don't know what to do, and this has to get done now, or everyone's mad at me, right? Like it's all of these like worst case scenarios. So like if you are someone that tends to kind of like lean into that, like, I don't want to say like dooms thinking, but it is very just like negative, like there's no point to this, it's too much, like I don't want to do this, like those are signs of a dysregulated nervous system. Whereas a more regulated nervous system sounds like, I'm very curious about this feels possible even if I don't have the answers yet. The world is a safe place for me to explore and seek understanding. And so like you have just a more open mindset and like a willingness to ask questions and be curious and like seek to understand the world and the people around you and your environment. So the longer that your nervous system stays in a place of fight or flight, the less efficient it becomes at transitioning from sympathetic to parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest. So if you ever like feel like you have a really hard time with like changing your mindset, or positive affirmations, like you feel like positive affirmations just like don't work for you, it's likely a deeper rooted cause of nervous system dysregulation, right? It's not like just a mindset thing. It's not about just having more positive thoughts. It's about changing the state of your nervous system, and that is done via releasing those long-held emotions. So when you are navigating through life with an overactive nervous system, that is causing a very constant low-grade production of cortisol, the stress hormone. And this constant stream of cortisol begins to take a toll on your adrenal glands, and you begin to experience very low-grade chronic fatigue. And then systemic inflammation begins to take place in the body. Okay, so you have this like constant overproduction of cortisol, which creates fatigue and inflammation in the body. Okay, that cortisol triggers an inflammatory response. And so now you're involving the immune system. So now the immune system has become hyperactive in response to this low-grade, very unnoticed, undetected stress. And after a long time, that's when you experience autoimmune symptoms. So yes, while there are many environmental and lifestyle factors in the physical sense that contribute to autoimmune disease, I want to encourage you to also look at the internal environmental things that create autoimmune disease. I give the window example a lot because I know it sounds confusing when I say that autoimmune disease doesn't mean that there is something wrong with you. It means that something is right, because autoimmunity is exactly how the immune system was designed to work in response to an overload of input from either the internal or external environment. So imagine a window, right? So you have this window and you throw a rock at it. Probably nothing happens, right? But then you throw another rock and now it's got a crack in it. Why? Because it was kind of partially compromised the first time you threw a rock at it. And now you're throwing another rock and it gets a crack. And let's say you throw another bigger rock, the window breaks. Do you blame the window? Do you say something is wrong with this window? Like the window is confused. Like, no, you expected the window to break after having rocks thrown at it. And you say like, yeah, that makes sense. Like rocks are being thrown at this window and it broke. But I mean, sure, now you have this broken window that needs fixing. But the root of the problem wasn't ever the window. It was the rocks being thrown at it. And the rocks, my friends, well, those are yours. The rocks are the unresolved emotions and the thought patterns developed as children that now shape and define your life. So to review, you have an unresolved emotion that creates nervous system dysregulation because you have this alarm signal in the body that is just on all the time. And that signals to your body cortisol and inflammation because it's like this low grade chronic stress that just never goes away, right? You can't address it. You can't manage it because you don't really realize it's there. And then you get an increased activity response from the immune system. So that's a hyperactive immune system. And that is where autoimmune symptoms, autoimmune disease becomes present. But you might be thinking, okay, how do you go so many years without experiencing anything? And it's like all of a sudden symptoms just start showing up, right? Like you know, if these unresolved emotions happened as a kid, like why now as an adult am I getting an autoimmune disease? Like, right? Like why wasn't I experiencing these symptoms all those years in between? This is because the body is actually quite resilient and it can handle a large load of stress without it breaking down. But eventually, it meets its capacity, and that is when you experience symptoms. So in neurology, there's this concept called the threat bucket, and it's a way to explain how the nervous system communicates with the body. So when you are born, you have an empty bucket, right? But through the course of your life and based on your experiences, like you begin to accumulate things into your threat bucket. So things that were presented as threats. So like just as some examples, like you fell off your bike and you hurt your knee, or you had a really intense fight with your sibling and like your emotions didn't get validated, right? You were blamed for it. You had a terrible breakup like in your teenage years, or like you had a surgery, or you got sick. Like, you know, you get the idea. Like all of these things begin to accumulate into your threat bucket. And if you don't address things properly, they begin to pile up. And through this entire time, like you were just living your life, right? With no disease, no symptoms. And then all of a sudden, something else happened unexpectedly, unplanned. And it just overflows your bucket. And that is when you experience symptoms. So your body has reached the capacity of what it can hold. Like if you currently experience autoimmune disease, autoimmune symptoms, like think back to when you first started having symptoms, when your body first started expressing symptoms. If you go back a little bit more, like more often than not, like you will have like a really big or emotional event in your life. And then after that, symptoms started happening, right? Symptoms started showing up. So, and it's usually like there's something that overflows the bucket. But in order for that bucket to overflow, it had to be full in the first place. So when your nervous system can no longer hold all the things, the disease happens. Like disease, specifically autoimmune disease, is not the cause of your pain, inflammation, or fatigue. Rather, it is a result of a chronically dysregulated nervous system and a very under-recovered body. Right? So your threat bucket, you are accumulating all of these things through your life, but when this one thing, extra thing happens that overflows, like that is when you experience symptoms, which is why it's important to start to take things and start addressing things from your threat bucket, because the more room and space that your bucket has, the less likely it's going to be to overflow and your body to express symptoms. And so where do you start with addressing unresolved emotions? Like, this is a big part of caring for your threat bucket, is addressing those unresolved emotions. But you might be asking, well, how do I start? Like I don't even know what unresolved emotions might be there. And that's totally okay. Like, if you were anything like me, you overachiever, you were probably wanting to just identify all the possible emotions and resolve them as quickly and efficiently as possible. Okay, right? So you're asking, like, where do I start with resolving these emotions? I might not be aware of them, but I want to figure them all out so that I can, fix them and move on, right? Let me tell you why that won't work for you. Healing unresolved emotions takes time. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of reflection, and grace. So when you open the door to acknowledging emotions, it can get really heavy really fast. And trying to conquer all of your emotions quickly so that you can get on with your life, because you're thinking like, okay, if I find the root emotions and I solve it, then everything will be fixed and I will feel better and I will be healed. And actually, that is still sick thinking. And I say that in reference to sick Daniela, right? The identity that I held as a sick person. And it might be an identity that you are also holding as well. So if you are approaching this with the mentality of, okay, now my emotions are, like, I recognize my emotions are the thing that's causing the disease and I have to fix it, that is very sick identity thinking, right? The issue with wanting to fix all of your emotions so that you can be healed is that you're looking at emotions as the enemy. So now you're pointing your finger at something else and saying like, oh, that's the bad guy. That's what's wrong with me. It's my emotions. And now you're back to that place of searching and looking for what's wrong. So I want to pause you right there and say the first and most important step in healing unresolved emotions is recognizing that emotions are not bad. They are good. So repeat after me. My emotions are good. Go ahead and say it out loud. My emotions are good. Your emotions are a part of how you interact with the world, how you experience life, how you experience relationships and interact with other people. They are a part of your social being as a human. Like, they are important and they are good. Yes, even the negative emotions that we normally think of as bad, like anxiety, depression, shame, guilt, like all of those are good. Why? Because they communicate something to us about how we are interacting with our environment. The second step in healing unresolved emotions is curiosity, being willing to explore and spend time with your emotions. And this takes practice. So again, don't jump straight to, let me get to my deepest psyche and resolve all the emotional wounds of my childhood. Like, no, first just start by noticing what emotions come up regularly in your day-to-day life. Like, what emotions come up as you interact with people, coworkers, friends, family. What emotions come up when you're faced with a difficult task? What emotions come up when you're presented with joyful things in your life? Just start noticing and being curious, like, why is this my response to this situation? And you slowly start to peel back those layers of emotions. You don't have to cut straight deep to the core to resolve your deepest wounds. Like, I mean, that's like trying to get married on a first date, right? Like, I know those like crazy reality shows be doing that, but we know that doesn't always go very well. Like, you want to build a relationship with your emotions first. And this is part of that relationship with having a relationship with yourself that I often talk about. Like, it's this process of getting to know yourself genuinely. I mean, like, imagine being on a date and someone just like rapid firing questions at you, like in an effort to like, quote unquote, get to know you. You would probably feel like this person doesn't actually want to get to know me. Like, this feels weird. They're just like interviewing me, right? Like, so take your time in exploring. Like, and in doing so, you also create this sense of safety, which is an important factor for nervous system regulation. So once you start to explore and be curious and spend time and not be afraid to be with your emotions, to acknowledge your emotions, or to even say like, I feel sad, or I feel angry about this, I feel excited, I feel joyful, whatever it is, like, you can acknowledge it. And in doing so, you're starting to create safety, and it's not this constant bout of rejection that your nervous system is always facing, but now it's at least acknowledgement on its way to acceptance, right? And so your body is going to be like, she does care about us. Okay, we are safe to feel. We are safe to move these emotions that we were previously not safe to do so. And so over time, as you create the safety and feeling and exploring your emotions, like, your body will start to feel safe to communicate even more things to you. And this is where you can get to the good stuff. And as hard as it is to confront those deeply held wounds, like, you'll be much more prepared to handle them because you've had practice in exploring and in sitting with your emotions without trying to push them away or even shame yourself for having them. I mean, it's like strength training, you know, you don't pick up the heaviest weight first, like, you build your way up to it through like regular workouts. And like, even in like within one workout, like, you don't just start with like your 1 rep max, like, you work your way up to it, and you kind of increase your weight in like those sets. But then also you increase your weights over time as you get stronger. It's like literally an emotional workout for you to be able to handle a heavier emotional load. And as you start to unpack those emotions, like, okay, I have to be honest about this. It's not a comfortable journey by any means, but at the same time, it is the most beautiful journey that I have ever been on. Like, I have met myself. I have met Daniela, me as I am, just me, not sick Daniela, not angry Daniela, not the extrovert Daniela I often try to make myself to be, but Daniela, like the me of who I am at my core. And I have to tell you, I actually really like her. And that is my desire for you too, is to know yourself and love yourself. And that's what like Remade Wellness is all about, is having that second chance to really get to know yourself, to really care for yourself, and just have more compassion for who you are. And so if you are ready to explore your emotions and the emotions lying beneath the physical symptoms of autoimmune disease, I created a really amazing resource for you all. It's my free ebook, Unlocking Your Body's Secrets, a guide to understanding your emotions and healing chronic symptoms. So in this book, I discuss some of what we talked about today, like the importance of that mind-body connection, that psychosomatic connection we talked about. And I share about the role of the nervous system in communicating with your body, so like the threat bucket. And I also provide a chart of where certain emotions often like to reside in the body, so you can kind of begin to explore what emotions your symptoms may be trying to protect. And then, of course, you know me, I'm always about asking those reflection questions to help you get to know yourself better. So there are some reflection questions in there to help you begin exploring a more compassionate relationship with your body. This ebook is such a great place to start because it opens up your curiosity about your symptoms in a way that allows you to explore and come from a place of understanding and not necessarily like seeking to fix it and get rid of it, because there's nothing to fix there. Like, your body is perfect in every way, and yes, even in the autoimmune responses that it has, those responses are perfect. We just have to be willing and brave to understand them, like be willing to understand them. So the link to download my ebook is provided in the show notes. So make sure you head there and download the ebook and start exploring what your physical symptoms might be saying about the underlying emotions that are needing some attention in your life. As always, thank you so much for joining me for another episode. If you found this episode helpful, please connect with me, let me know, or better yet, please consider leaving me a review. I don't have any official podcast reviews yet, so I would love for you to be the first one. Until next time, be well, my friends.